We've studied over 62 of Asia's most heinous crimes, and these are the top 8 most heinous. Number 8. On the afternoon of November 2nd, 2020, the quiet of a residential estate in Chongqing, China, was broken by a thunderous sound, followed by screams. Residents rushed outside. Beneath a high-rise building, on a patch of grass littered with broken branches and fallen leaves, lay the bodies of 2 toddlers. A 2-year-old girl and her 1-year-old brother. One had died instantly, the other would die hours later in hospital. Moments after the fall, their father came running down the stairs. He was barefoot, wearing pajamas, sobbing uncontrollably. He beat his head against the ground, pushed past emergency workers, and begged to see his children. To everyone watching, he looked like a man destroyed by an unthinkable tragedy. But almost immediately, questions began to surface. The window ledge was unusually high. The opening was narrow, too narrow for 2 toddlers to climb through on their own. The little girl had been raised to fear windows, taught never to approach them, and Zhang Bo, a man who had shown little interest in his children, had suddenly insisted they stay with him that night. Police began to look closer. What emerged was a second life. Zhang Bo was deeply in debt, obsessed with appearing wealthy, even buying a luxury car he couldn't afford. While still married, he had begun an affair with a woman from a rich family. After the divorce, one problem remained. She refused to marry a man with children. Investigators uncovered messages between them, not arguments, plans, discussions about how the children could die, traffic accidents, rivers, insurance, risks. Each option considered, each one weighed. On the day of the murders, Zhang Bo stood alone in his 15th floor apartment with his children. He hesitated. Then his phone vibrated. "When the kids are gone, I'll marry you." The message read, "Why don't you kill both, since you'll be killing anyway?" Zhang Bo walked into the bedroom. His children were playing. They didn't cry. They didn't resist. He picked them up, and he threw them out of the window. When confronted with the evidence, the image of a grieving father collapsed. In 2021, Zhang Bo and his lover were sentenced to death for intentional homicide. While awaiting appeal, Zhang wrote letters begging forgiveness. He offered his house. He asked for mercy. The children's mother replied with a single demand. "For the sake of my 2 children," she wrote, "I must see you die at all costs." Zhang's evil deed ranks among the top 8 most heinous crimes in Asia because of a uniquely Asian implication. It tears apart one of the most important values of filial piety and family. In Asia, family is sacred. Parents exist to protect. Children exist to honor. Family is meant to be the safest place in the world. When family becomes the source of terror, it creates a horror deeper than violence from strangers, because it destroys the place Asians are taught to trust first. Filial piety and family betrayal is one of the categories we'll be looking at across all the 8 most heinous cases in Asia. We've 2 more categories, with the final category going against everything we know on what it means to be in our Asian society. But back to filial piety, because the next case, number 7, is harrowing. In early March 2013, a Facebook page appeared with a simple title, "My Missing Mom and Dad." It was created by 2 brothers, photos of smiling parents, pleas for help, messages asking the public to share. The younger brother, Henry Chow, became the face of the search. He spoke to the media calmly, confidently, suggesting his parents may have gone on a spontaneous trip and met with trouble. To most people, he looked like a worried son. But his older brother wasn't convinced. Their parents never traveled without planning, never left without luggage, and Henry's behavior inside the empty apartment felt wrong, too relaxed, almost relieved. Police soon confirmed something unsettling. Immigration records showed the parents had never left Hong Kong. On March 14th, officers brought the brothers in for questioning. As detectives spoke, Henry barely paid attention. His eyes stayed on his phone. His fingers moved constantly. What the officers didn't know was that Henry was messaging a WhatsApp gaming group. "I'm at the police station now," he wrote. "I'll string them along for a while." That evening, he met a friend for dinner and calmly explained that he had killed his parents. He said he would go home and sleep the next day. Immediately, someone in the WhatsApp group reported it to the police. When officers raided the apartment in Tai Kok Tsui the next morning, the smell hit them immediately. One described it as walking into a slaughterhouse. Inside, they found bags of cement and sand, knives, saws, 2 refrigerators. Inside the freezers were the severed heads of Henry's parents. Nearby were takeaway containers filled with cooked flesh, mixed with rice and sauce, prepared like ordinary meals. The truth came together quickly. On March 1st, Henry had invited his parents over, saying he needed help cleaning his new place. CCTV showed them entering the building together. They were never seen again. Once inside, he attacked them. Afterward, he and an accomplice spent days dismembering the bodies, salting and cooking the remains to hide the evidence. Police later found a notebook titled How to Dismember a Body, complete with shopping lists and backup plans. In court, Henry showed no remorse. He blamed his parents for his failures in life. He told psychiatrists he felt relief when he saw their empty bed. He admitted he had even considered killing his brother. In 2015, Henry Chow was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder. The apartment where his parents were killed was later demolished. In a society built on filial piety, this wasn't just murder, it was the complete rejection of what a son is supposed to be. Number 6. On the morning of January 6, 1979, Tan Quen Chai and his wife left their flat in Geylang Bahru before sunrise. They ran a school minibus service, and this was their routine. Their 4 children were still asleep, 3 boys and a 5-year-old daughter, tucked safely inside the home. At 7:10 a.m., as she always did, Mrs. Tan called home to wake them for school. No one answered. She called again, and again. The phone rang into silence. Unease turned to fear. A neighbor was asked to knock on the door. There was no response. Just before 10 a.m., the parents raced back. Mrs. Tan reached the flat first. She unlocked the door, called out their names, and stepped inside. The bedrooms were empty. As she moved toward the bathroom, she noticed light spilling through the door. And something else. A dark red glow on the floor. Inside, her 4 children lay piled together. They had been slaughtered. The bathroom was soaked in blood. Each child had been slashed again and again. Arms, faces, heads. The violence was relentless, far beyond what was needed to kill. Police found no signs of forced entry. Nothing had been stolen. The killer had washed up before leaving and taken the weapons along. Whoever did this had time and familiarity. 2 weeks later, a Chinese New Year card arrived. On the front were smiling children at play. Inside was a message written to the parents by their nicknames. Now you can have no more offspring. It was signed, The Murderer. The message revealed something chilling. The killer knew the family intimately, knew that Mrs. Tan had been sterilized. This wasn't just the killing of children, it was the erasure of a family line. A suspect briefly emerged, a familiar neighbor seen with bloodstains that morning, but there was no proof strong enough to hold him. In the late 1970s, forensic science could not give the answers it can today. The case went cold. The 4 children were buried together with their school bags and toys. Mr. Tan died never knowing who destroyed his family. Mrs. Tan lived on, carrying the memory of that morning for the rest of her life. The next category of crimes reveals something else entirely. What happens when society fails to protect those who need it most? Across Asia, the protection of women is seen as a collective responsibility of families, communities, and the state. When that protection fails, the shame does not belong to the victim. It belongs to everyone. These next cases would be stomach-curdling. Case number 5. At dawn on March 11th, 2019, a villager walking past an open field in Lapu-Lapu City noticed something on the ground. From afar, it looked like a torn cardboard box stained red. As he moved closer, the shape became clear. It was a body. Lying in the grass was the half-naked corpse of a young girl. Her face was gone, peeled away from one side to the other, exposing bone and empty eye sockets. She was 16 years old. Her name was Christine Lee Silawan. The night before, Christine had gone to church, as she always did. She volunteered regularly and was known for her warmth and cheer. When she didn't come home that evening, her mother felt something was wrong. A missing person report was filed. The community searched. They found her the next morning. The autopsy revealed staggering violence. Christine had been stabbed more than 24 times, including a fatal wound to the neck. But the killing wasn't enough. Her face had been deliberately removed. Her tongue and windpipe were missing. Acid had been used. The goal was clear. She was meant to be unrecognizable. Police initially chased the wrong leads. A former criminal, a jealous teenage ex-boyfriend. None of it held. Then CCTV footage surfaced, showing Christine calmly walking with a man the night she died. She knew him, or thought she did. Investigators examined her online messages. CJ Diaz was a name that kept appearing, a new romantic interest she had met on Facebook. Photos showed a handsome teenage boy. But CJ Diaz didn't exist. He was Renato Lins, 43 years old. Renato had created a fake profile to lure young girls. He had been talking to Christine for months. When they met outside the church, she immediately realized the truth and tried to leave. He followed her. When she rejected him and threatened to call her ex-boyfriend for help, Renato snapped. He dragged her into the field. He stabbed her repeatedly with a pair of scissors. Then, fearing identification, he mutilated her face, later claiming he learned how from videos online. Renato was arrested on an unrelated charge and confessed. He said guilt pushed him to speak, especially after seeing a teenage boy wrongly accused. Before he could stand trial, Renato Lins was found dead in his cell, an apparent suicide. Christine's mother believes the full truth died with him, and the girl who went to church that evening never came home. We still have one more final category after this, and it's the breakdown of what makes us uniquely Asian. But first, the final case in this category, case number 4. On the evening of December 16, 2012, Jyoti Singh and her friend stepped out of a cinema in South Delhi. They had just finished watching Life of Pi. It was late, but not unusual. They waited at a bus stop, talking, expecting to be home soon. A bus slowed down in front of them. A young man leaned out and called to them. He said the bus was heading toward their neighborhood. The fare was cheap, 10 rupees. It looked like a normal ride. They boarded. Inside, the lights were dim. 6 men sat scattered across the seats, watching them in silence. The bus pulled away. Almost immediately, something felt wrong. The route was wrong. When Jyoti's friend stood up to question the driver, he realized the doors were locked. The bus was no longer transport. It was a moving cage. The men closed in. They beat her friend first, taunting him as they did. A metal rod came down on his head, and he collapsed to the floor. With no one left to shield her, the men dragged Jyoti to the back of the bus. For over an hour, as the bus roamed the streets of Delhi, she fought them. She screamed. She resisted. She refused to surrender. Her resistance enraged them. The iron rod was used again, this time with devastating force. The violence crossed into something so extreme that doctors would later struggle to describe it without breaking down. When they were done, the men threw both bodies out of the moving bus, naked and bleeding, onto the side of the road. Then they drove away. Strangers found them and called for help. Jyoti was rushed into surgery, then another, and another. Large portions of her intestines had been destroyed. Her body was fighting, but it was losing. As she lay in hospital, the country erupted. Millions poured into the streets, demanding justice. Jyoti was flown to Singapore in a final attempt to save her life. She never made it home. On December 29, 2012, Jyoti Singh died from her injuries. Her name was never meant to be known, but what happened to her forced an entire nation to confront a truth it could no longer ignore. 4 of her attackers were eventually executed. 1 died in custody. The youngest served only 3 years. What remained was grief, anger, and a sense of frustration that may never fade. This final category is different. Here, the victims did exactly what they were taught to do. They listened, they obeyed, they trusted authority. In much of Asia, we are raised to believe that following instructions leads to safety, order, and good outcomes. These cases are the most heinous because they reveal how obedience and harmony, virtues meant to hold society together, can become fatal. Case number 3. In the early 1950s, something went wrong in Minamata Bay. At first, no one noticed the people. They noticed the animals. Birds began falling from the sky. Fish floated lifeless in the water. And then there were the cats. They convulsed, screamed, and staggered through the streets in what locals called the dancing disease. before throwing themselves into the sea. It looked unnatural. It was. In 1956, the sickness reached humans. A young girl was brought to a doctor, unable to walk, see, or speak properly. Soon there were more. Limbs went numb, minds fractured. People slipped into comas and died. No one knew why. Families were struck together, which made the town fear contagion. Victims were isolated. Their relatives were shunned. Shops refused them service. People whispered that the families were cursed. But the truth was flowing quietly through the bay. For years, fishermen had noticed strange foam and liquid pouring from the pipes of the Chiso Corporation, the chemical plant that sustained Minamata's economy. Since the 1930s, the factory had been dumping mercury-laced wastewater directly into the sea. The poison didn't disappear. It climbed the food chain. In 1959, a company doctor secretly fed factory wastewater to cats. They developed the same convulsions, the same madness, the same death. He had proof. Chiso ordered him to stop. The research was buried. The dumping continued. And the government, prioritizing growth and stability, looked away. People kept eating the fish. Children were born twisted and blind. Nervous systems collapsed from the inside out. It took more than a decade before the victims were finally heard. In 1973, survivors confronted Chiso's president directly. As he spoke of prayer and sympathy, one man in the room, broken by years of pain, smashed a glass ashtray and cut his own wrists in front of him. Blood hit the floor. Only then did the company agree to pay. By the time the dumping stopped, hundreds were dead. Thousands more were permanently damaged. Entire generations were lost before they had a chance to live. Minamata wasn't just a pollution disaster. It was what happens when people trust institutions to protect them, and those institutions choose money instead. Cases like Minamata show how corporate greed takes hold, but more importantly, when a town is held hostage due to economic dependence. Our final case, however, would show money isn't everything. Sometimes people are just pure evil. Case number 2. On March 24th, 2023, a young man rushed into a police station in central Java after traveling 8 hours without rest. His father had been missing for 3 days. He had gone to visit a spiritual shaman and never came home. The son carried one thing that terrified him more than the silence. A final message from his father. "If I don't come back," it read, "come to this location and bring the police." Officers followed the coordinates to an isolated house at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by tall grass and mud. The man who answered the door was calm, polite, almost gentle. His name was Tohari Slamet. He said he knew nothing about the missing man. But in the backyard, officers noticed freshly turned soil. They began digging. Within minutes, they uncovered a body, then another, and another. By the end of the search, 12 bodies were found buried in the yard, some of them years old. Slamet was known locally as a dukun, a shaman. He promised healing, guidance, and most importantly, wealth. He told desperate people he could multiply their money through ritual. All they needed was faith and a small fee. Proteo had come with cash, drowning in debt and hoping for a miracle. In a dim room, Slamet performed a ritual that made it appear as if the money had multiplied. Proteo left believing his life had changed. Days later, he discovered the truth. The money was fake. When victims returned demanding answers, Slamet welcomed them back. He told them the ritual needed fixing. He led them into a small, windowless building on his property, a place even his wife was forbidden to enter. There, he offered them a drink. It was laced with cyanide. Within minutes, the victims convulsed and died. Slamet buried them in his backyard and waited for the next believer to arrive. Proteo's final message ended years of silence. Confronted with the bodies, Slamet confessed. In January 2024, he was sentenced to death for premeditated murder. This final case is bone-chilling. Abuse of authority for money is unfortunately common across the world. But in the context of this next case, the question is why? Why would one use authority to commit abuse? Well, because authority creates silence, and silence makes abuse possible. Case number 1. On a warm summer night in 2005, a newly hired teacher received a call from a mother whose voice was shaking. Her daughter, a deaf student at the school, had been assaulted. The teacher believed what he was hearing. He took the allegation to colleagues, to the nurse, and finally to the principal. The response was not shock. It was a warning. "Be quiet," the principal told him. That was when he understood. This was not one crime. It was a system. Gwangju Info School had presented itself as a refuge for deaf and disabled children since the 1960s. In reality, it was run like a private kingdom by one family. Administrators held absolute power. Students were beaten, forced into labor, and used for fundraising. But behind closed doors, the abuse went further. At night, students were summoned to offices and dormitories. Doors were locked. Keys were shared. The most vulnerable, orphans, children with no families, were targeted because they had nowhere to escape. The teacher began quietly gathering testimony. One student, terrified but brave, described being called into an office. Her friend sent away, the door locked behind her. Her statement was recorded and taken directly to authorities. The school retaliated immediately. The girl was forced to drink alcohol and coerced into recanting on camera. The teacher was fired, accused of lying, followed, harassed, and isolated. The message was clear: silence or suffer. The truth only broke through when an investigative television program exposed the case nationwide. Arrests followed, but for the victims, the trial became another form of abuse. There were no proper sign language interpreters. Defense lawyers argued the children were too disabled to be believed. Sentences were light. Some perpetrators walked free. Others returned to the same school. Justice failed. For years, nothing changed, until a film was released. In 2011, silence reached millions of viewers across South Korea. Public outrage exploded. Protests followed. The government was forced to act. Gwangju Inhwa School was finally shut down. If you want to understand what happened next, the trials, the aftermath, and the conversations that never made headlines, we've created full-length documentaries that tell each story from beginning to end. We've covered over 60 cases across Asia, many of them just as disturbing as the ones on this list. We hope for a future where there are no more stories like these to tell. But until then, remembering them is how the truth survives.